a group of people that would maybe, I think Scripture uses another word, it talks about subjecting ourselves.
Yes,
Subject ourselves one to another.
yes.
So,
But if someone walked in here and started saying, well, I think that we should include, a chapel in this church for people of other faiths.
Yeah.
So that, any Buddhists and Muslims and so forth, and I'd be like, that's not the same religion. Like, that's not, I'm all for loving those people, but we're not worshiping the same God at that point. So there's a line. I guess that's what I'm saying. Like, conviction to me means the non-negotiables. That's what I think of when I hear the word conviction. I think like, okay, like I have to proclaim Jesus and Jesus alone is Lord. If
So
anybody starts proclaiming something else,
yeah,
I'm not going to.
when you're talking about convictions, you're talking about some very serious items that for you, those are non-negotiables. Is that fair to say?
That you really can't. I mean, we can have a discussion about it, but I'm not going to change my opinion on those things.
We need to be, yeah, and I would just, and we need to be very careful about our conviction list, as you describe it, that our conviction list don't get so long that when we have a party, we're the only one we invite.
Yeah.
Is that right?
For sure.
Yeah. How else might we express within a group our humility? How else might we express our humility? Listening. That's good, Margaret. Part of humility is being willing to listen to the other person, okay? Now, I like this. I was reading a book. It's called Good Shepherds, and there's this chapter in here that's written by Randy Harris, and it's entitled Doctrinal Disagreement, Must It Be War? Okay? And one of the things that he talks about here is very much about listening. And when he says listen, he says we need to, and I'll put these words in his mouth, I hope they're right. When we listen to somebody, we need to listen to somebody with the same intent, the same thoughts that you would expect them to hear you with. Now that's really, really hard. I think that's really hard, particularly when I'm talking to somebody that I think is a world different than where I am, okay? It's hard for me to listen with the thought, man, I can do that. Yeah.
I'm going to say, I think this goes back, because my note from what they said on the video says that humility is often perceived as a lack of conviction.
Oh.
Which means when we are willing to be kind and listen and hear other people out that think differently than we do, that is often perceived as that we don't have conviction on that topic. And I very much will have conviction. I'm like Jordan here. There are things that I draw a line at and I do not cross that, but I'm willing to hear someone else's opinion. So I'm willing to be humble enough to listen to them, but I'm not changing my mind.
But I think too, you said listen in the same spirit that you would hope they would listen to you. Well, if I'm trying to persuade someone that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, I hope they'll change their mind. I can't listen to them, in the same spirit. There are a very few, and I think it should be a very few issues where I can be humble in that I'm not going to be unkind to someone or treat them like they're foolish or stupid about it. But I can't budge my opinion, and my hope is that they would.
He uses an example that I appreciate in here in terms of what that humble spirit is with areas where you feel a conviction. You have a conviction that from your point of view is not a compromisable place, okay? He says, and when you talk to this person, you need to understand this, you need to have this attitude. And he says, he gave this example, he says your daughter comes home and says, I am going to marry Ahmed, okay? All right? And let's just say what you've done is ask Ahmed to convert to Christ, okay? And he's Muslim. So you ask that question, you need to ask that question recognizing that Ahmed has gone to his parents and he's looked at his parents who are Muslim and he said, look, I'm marrying Mary and I'm converting to Christianity. And what's their point of view? What's their thoughts? What do you do to them when you say that, okay? I think that's really, the listening thing is You recognize where that other person is. You gotta hear that, and it's gotta touch your heart when you hear that. Housemate, Margaret, you want to add anything else to the listening thing? How about the way, yeah, Daniel?
Acknowledging your mistakes.
Sir?
Acknowledging your mistakes.
Acknowledge your mistakes. Okay, you're way ahead of me. What's that got to do with listening?
Oh, I'm sorry. I
You're-
thought we were talking about humility.
Now, you skipped one, Daniel. Now, let me ask this question, okay? How should we respond when we're speaking? Daniel, you need to go now, okay?
How should we respond when we're speaking?
Yes, when we're giving our part, what should our speech, what should we indicate in our speech? Just what you said. There's times within our speech we need to admit, our own wrongs, what is weak about maybe our own argument. When we doubt ourselves, some people have said to doubt is a huge step towards faithfulness. Because when you doubt something, you seek it, right? You seek it. You're just not just taking it. It's not just being spoon-fed like pablum to you. You're actually thinking through this. Let me throw something else at you in terms of arguing a point that I'm passionate about. So some of you know this, and so it doesn't really matter. So I was on this board, okay? And when I wanted to get something done, I would, and I want to be right here on this point, these people are right here. The way to get those people right here was not to argue right here, it was to argue right out here. You understand that? You hyperbolize your argument, and you make your argument way out here radical, hoping to pull them here. Is that fair? Is that fair? Huh? Is that honest? Is that honest?
Well, that's what happens every day. Go buy a car. I hate it. It's too strong. But no, I mean, that's life.
What'd you say?
It doesn't
It
matter.
doesn't matter. You're just wasting breath.
It was Amy. Hey, Daniel, when you were an alderman, you still are an alderman for a little while.
Hey, kick me out, I guess.
For a little while. We didn't kick you out, period. I wish you'd run again, but anyway. Oh, wait a minute, that was very political. Daniel, have you ever argued a point where you may be stretched where you were in order to get somebody to come further?
Yeah. I mean,
You think that's honest?
It's what we all
I
do.
do.
Daniel, you need to go before the church.
No, I think that it's, when I'm trying to make an argument, the argument that I'm going to make to you
Yeah.
is different than the one that I'm going to make to him or her in the way that I frame it, because you are different. And so I'm trying to get, anytime, when I'm sitting up there, I know who I need to vote from, who I don't, who's already got it, so I'm going to frame.
You're looking for the edge.
And I don't know that it's dishonest to say, man, I've never said a time I believe this, and I haven't actually believed it, but
Has Mr. Burnett ever done a budget? A few times, okay, where you knew you needed this many dollars, but you asked for that many dollars. You ever done that? That wasn't very honest, Gerald.
It's the way we had to get it done. So, I mean,
You always ask for more, so you're not gonna get it.
You always ask for more so you get it.
It's hopeful.
I am speaking to a bunch of immature sinners this morning. Okay, y'all need to come around, all right? Oh, look here. I would argue, okay, that sometimes our use and our hyperbolization of our position within some of these conversations is harmful. Okay? And I get the business side. I understand that. I mean, I understand. It's okay. I do it myself, all right? Okay. It's okay. But what I'm saying is sometimes within our conversations where we're trying to prove a point to somebody, and in fact, where to me it can become, it's almost impersonal. We're talking past that person. We're not talking to understand where they are. We're talking to make sure they get where we are, and if they don't get it, they'll at least come this far, okay?
Do we call it the devil's advocate sometimes?
Call that the devil's advocate.
That's what he
Give me an
said.
example of a,
Go, give me,
or like a specific example of a harmful conversation you're talking about. I'm just having a hard time framing this in my.
okay, let me try
Well,
this.
next one, I always look at.
All right.
More than once, so I'm gonna find out.
Gerald is at my rescue. Go ahead, Gerald.
I would just say, sometimes when you're looking at a problem, a complicated problem, it's good to look at the extreme situation. I'm not saying I'm exaggerating my point, but look at the extremes on both sides. So you can kind of picture exactly what we're talking about. I mean, some of these things are very difficult, and if you look at the worst case scenario, then maybe that helps you see where the middle ground is. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I think that's very, very fair to say. I guess what I'm trying to come up with in my mind is within conversation with people when I disagree with something, okay? Man, some people just take such a hard line. They can take just a really hard line that they know it's not acceptable. They know it's not going to happen. It offers no compromise whatsoever. And I think that within our conversation, part of humility is recognizing that there may have to be compromise in what your position is. You hear that?
I think one example of this in a political sphere is when, and I'm not trying to call anybody out or accuse anybody here, but I think that very often I might be inclined to vote independent or vote for like a candidate in the primaries that isn't likely to be on top or whatever. And a lot of people have told me that I'm throwing away my vote. And to me, my reasoning for that is that if somebody doesn't meet my moral standards in any way, I can't in good conscience vote for them. And I feel like the whole point is to vote your conscience, you know? So like, and I'm not trying to tell anybody how they should vote here. Okay, that's not what I'm talking about. But I think that a lot of times people will take a hard line saying you have to choose a party.
Yeah.
You absolutely must, and if you don't, then your voice doesn't even count, you're just throwing away your vote, you know? And I think that's one conversation where we really need to be more respectful, both people who vote independent, understanding why some other people might not be inclined to do that they might feel that they need to pick one of the candidates who's most likely to win. Because there are reasons for doing that, and they're not necessarily diametrically opposed to you just because they did that, you know. But then also people who do choose one of the candidates, you know, not looking down on those who choose to not vote or to vote independent or whatever.
Yeah. Some people have been very critical of me in the election a time ago that I voted for myself, the president. You know. They don't understand that. They don't understand that, but I did think there for a moment, not really.
Did you get any more than one vote?
No, Gerald, I had over 100 votes in Moore County, I'll have you know. Yes, there were countless votes in Coffee County. You know what countless means? I have no idea. All I can tell you is when that lady took my ballot, and they are not supposed to look at your ballot. They are not supposed to look at your ballot. And she looked at me and laughed. Hey, so let's stop just a minute. So I used the word compromise just a minute ago. Compromise. You that have been in the church for a while, okay? When I use the word compromise out here, okay? We talk about compromise. Is that a positive or a negative term? Huh?
Because he votes, depending on which side you're on.
You say
Amy, I would like you to take a
compromise
side, Amy. Come on, this is not an independent
I'm just
vote.
gonna agree to disagree.
What?
It depends upon my level of conviction.
Okay, all right.
If
So,
somebody uses the phrase compromise your values, then I feel like, okay, that's definitely a negative connotation. But if somebody says, let's arrive at a compromise,
yeah.
I'm open to.
So let me just, from my point of view, okay, where I grew up and the way that I grew up within church, when we talked about compromise, okay, that was negative. We do not compromise the Lord's word on anything. We've got it down. You want to change it, that's a compromise. I'm not doing it. Okay? That is that's a real threat to my faith. Did anybody else grow up that way? Am I the only one?
Yes.
You heard it?
I did.
Could we have a vote? How many people heard about that? Jimmy, you were telling a lie.
But, see, if
What?
you're talking about the word of God, or you're talking the number of songs we sing before prayer, okay,
Yeah.
compromise, that depends.
That's right. We got our conviction list, okay? But what I'm talking about things that aren't on that conviction list, okay?
Okay.
Can we understand that there has to be sometimes when we disagree, there has to be compromise?
Yes.
So, and how we arrive at that compromise, okay, is something that we need to think really, really hard about. Now, what's the guy's name, Jerry? I want to hear.
David French.
David French he's the bald head guy on this, okay? There's not one bald head guy, is there?
There's just one.
Well, David French, I mean, if he's got any hair, I mean, it's hard to see because it's shaved, all of it, okay? David French was at Lipscomb on Tuesday night, Margaret. It's Tuesday night. And Margaret and I drove up there and listened to him. I really enjoyed being there, all right? I wanted to hear it. I mean, this guy's talking on here. I kind of want to know what kind of guy this is. And have a little conversation. Did have a little conversation with him. In fact, asked him if he wouldn't come down here sometime. Seemed like he was amenable to that. I said, we're going to get through your class and see whether we like it or not, and then we might ask you. Yeah. But one of the things that David addressed this very thing, which I thought was very interesting, okay? He says, with any relationship, with any attempt to try to convince someone, he said number one was affection. Number one was affection. You have to establish an affectionate relation for that person. Now, how do we start off with an affectionate relationship for somebody with whom, from the get-go, we disagree? What's the basis of our affection for that person? God what now?
God's love for them.
God's love for them. God loves them. Okay. Maybe we ought to. How about there's a popular term, and I like it. They are a image bearer, okay? Just like we are. They are created in the image of God just like we are. They're human beings. I'm a human being. We're both made by God. God loves us both, Randy. So there's an establishment right there. And for that reason alone, from the get-go, there's a certain love that you have for that person. There's a certain respect that you want to have for that person, right? There's an attempt that you would like to make to, in fact, be their friend, right? So it starts off with affection. And then what was the second thing, Margaret?
Did you listen to the talk?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, all right, I know. The third one I may have struggled
How about
with. It's understanding their background. I don't know what the word was, but understanding the other person's, where they come from.
It's an attempt to establish some commonality. All right? You want to establish some commonality. How much you do that? How much you do that in conversation?
You find mutual interest.
Yeah, there you go. You know, one of the things that I've said many, many times, Rick, is when you're trying to discuss something with somebody where you disagree with something, you got something to say and you want them to hear it. Let it be done by the right person. That's a person that they have some relationship. Okay? Let it be done at the right time. Let it be done at the right way. You know, there's the truth. Truth is never heard. I won't say never. Truth is harder to hear when it's not done in a correct way. Truth conveyed wrongfully gets you nowhere. So, right time, right person, right place, right spirit, all of that allows you to convey truth in a way where it's heard, okay? And part of getting the truth to someone is having some relationship with the person where they hear you. How might that happen? You know, you love them, okay? And now you want to develop a little camaraderie with them. Margaret mentioned a person that hasn't been here to this church in probably 20 years. And one of our members had reached out and recognized them and wanted to invite them to church. And the comment made was, what do you think we need to do? Should we ask Jerry to go see them? And my comment was, no, they don't have a clue who Jerry is. They need to visit by somebody that knows them. Hear that? And I think that that's true. So when you have a situation with someone where you do have a disagreement, anything that you can do to find some commonality outside of that specific disagreement helps with the conversation. And then the last thing that he added to it was the actual convincing, where you get down to the facts of this is what I feel and how I feel and how we do that and how we communicate that. That was basically his talk Tuesday night. And I found that useful. I found that
Is
very
that also not like manipulating, right? So I understand who you are, I understand your background, I understand what your triggers are, how I can relate to you, and then I use that against you
okay.
to get you to come.
All right, that's a really good question there. What's the difference in trying to convince somebody of something and manipulating?
I think the
Maybe
difference
the
is if you're.
Huh?
The intent.
But
All
what
right,
do
all
you do if they
right.
don't agree?
Hold, wait just a minute. Let me back up on my own language. What's the difference in me trying to convince someone of what I think and trying to convince someone of what the truth is? Is there a difference?
Sometimes.
Huh?
It depends on whether what you think is the truth.
But again, if you're building a relationship with someone in order to prove a point, that's kind of a rough way of saying that. What are you gonna do when they don't agree with your point? Are you still gonna have that relationship with them, hoping that later in the future, that you will have a better way of, it can come again to have that conversation? Or are you just gonna walk away because you didn't prove a point? That goes to your intent. If your intent is to in the future win this person over, especially to God's love, then to me, you still have a relationship with them. And that would be us with anybody in public. And that was how like God had to come down. I think one of it, when Jesus was on earth, he didn't talk about how to do a worship service. He talked about getting involved with people who you think are unclean so that you have a relationship with them in order to pull them back.
I think about a story that Jesus told, okay? And he talks about digging the soil, he talks about planting the soil, he talks about all this stuff you need to do to grow a garden.
It takes a long time.
But in the end, what's it say? God will give the increase. God gives the increase. So no, Amy, I don't think you can. I think if you got an attitude, well, I didn't convince them right then. You know, they're straight from hell. They're unredeemable. I didn't get it done. Yeah, actually, what I didn't get it done. You know, where's my faith? It's certain. I guess it's in me Almighty, right? Yeah, I mean, we need to get beyond that. Somebody else had a point back here.
Yeah, hey, dang it, to answer your question. My wife and I used to conspire on a regular basis on how to manipulate our children.
And still do. No shame.
I have a group of people at work I'm responsible for, and I try to manipulate their viewpoint and their priorities on a daily basis. But I'm manipulating them into a direction that I see as positive, it's necessary, at work, it's that our company says is what we're supposed to do. So that is my job, is to manipulate their perceptions, their goals, and to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do for the company. None of my 3 kids are in jail yet, so I think we did a pretty good job manipulating them. It's just how you look at what you
Hang on a minute,
try to
Charlotte.
lead them to Jesus.
I got to think about that.
It's your goal. It's your goal. To me, manipulate means for my personal gain. I'm going to get you to do something for me that makes me look good, that helps me out, whether it helps you or not.
Yeah, that'd be a negative connotation of
That's a
manipulation.
negative
Your
connotation.
husband's using it a positive way.
I know.
When
But
y'all
what I'm
eat
saying
lunch
is-
together, get yourselves together.
Hey, listen, we're new at this. We've only been doing it 40 years. Okay, but I think that when we convince somebody of something,
Yeah.
that is when we are looking to their benefit as well as our own. And we're trying to convince them of good things. And so I think that for me, when you say, manipulate, I'm thinking that's a negative. When you say convince, I'm thinking that's a positive.
Okay,
It's
good.
the difference between somebody wanting to lead a bunch of people to Christ so that they can have the prestige and say, hey, look how many people I've led to Christ,
Mhm.
so that they can kind of have some points in the kingdom, versus somebody who just wants to share Jesus with everybody because Jesus has become so lovely to them that they want everybody else to see him as lovely too.
I hear that. Charlotte?
I think what they're saying it, we're saying it here, take the word manipulate and use the word guidance.
Guidance, guide.
Guidance,
Guide.
and in the guidance, and then I think that you also always have to develop relationships. I think that's what Jesus did.
And-
I think that's what he tells us to do.
And there is some strategy in how we guide, isn't there?
Always.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely. I mean-
Teachers, we guide, I manipulated 5-year-olds, but I guided.
Parents have to figure some of those things out. All right, somebody didn't have anything to say, hadn't made a comment yet. You got your chance right now. Anybody?
Have you noticed how quiet I've been?
We're gonna, next week, I've got a sheet of questions, and we're gonna figure out who's the most humble in here. And we're gonna give the most humble award to somebody. I'll see y'all next week. Hey, sure enough, boy, he ran off. Where Jerry went, some of y'all got this handout. We're gonna do the third part of the, actually, we're gonna finish the second next week, okay? So you look through that second thing, you see that bunch of questions that we've got in there. And if somebody wants another copy,
They made more, brought them in.
they've got more. Where are
They
they,
brought them
Jan?
in here, I don't know.
Here's
They got
where's,
passed
what's,
around.
what's the website that you can?
Right Now Media, if you go to Right Now Media, and then you, in the search, you'll type in the after party, and the David Fritz, you'll see that the author is David Fritz. You'll click that, and it's there. And there's resources, you can print this all for yourself. Like, I just went ahead and printed the whole thing for myself, so.
I need to find one of y'all to argue with next week so we can demonstrate how not to do this. Okay, Seal, you're on. Seal, we